So, looking at herbs, everybody thinks it's just a weak version of the drug because some plants have drug-like properties, and many of our drugs actually come from plants.
Mhm.
But those aren't the herbs that most herbalists use, and I don't use. So, what I'm using is herbs that have a low potential to have drug-like side effects, are well tolerated, can be taken for long durations.
Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now, here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson, and today we're joined by Dr. Bill Rawls, who has dedicated his life to medicine for 40 years. When a health crisis with chronic Lyme disease abruptly changed his quality of life, he came face to face with the limitations of modern medicine and began to explore the vast possibilities of alternative treatments. Restoring his health through holistic and herbal therapies inspired him to share his revelations on the importance of cellular wellness for defending against microbes and other root causes of illness. Today, he works to bring life and vitality to others as he helps them establish their own paths to wellness through modern herbology. Through his best-selling books, Unlocking Lyme and The Cellular Wellness Solution, Dr. Rawls demonstrates why crucial herbal phytochemicals are key to protecting cellular health and strengthening the body's defense against illness. Dr. Rawls is also the founder of holistic health company Vital Plan. In today's conversation, we're talking about focusing on cellular wellness to allow the body to heal from chronic illness and how using herbs may just be the missing cellular support you need. Dr. Rawls, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited for this conversation, but I would love for you to share with listeners a little bit of your journey. How does somebody start focusing on the potential of herbs and healing when they've spent all this time practicing as an MD? So
Yeah.
share a bit of your wellness journey with
Yeah,
us.
it's been a curious journey, no doubt about it. Interestingly, some milestones for me. This year is 40 years since I graduated from medical school,
Wow,
and
congrats.
20 years since my turning point where I felt like I was really crawling out of the hole from chronic illness and moving forward, and ultimately got better. So I've kind of been in two camps, that conventional camp in the beginning, and then a totally different space for the past 20 years. And when I graduated from medical school, during medical school, I just wasn't captivated by medical management of chronic illnesses with drugs. So I chose obstetrics and gynecology, which was dealing with young, healthy people, acute interventions that really mattered. And I did a lot of good in my career. But back then, it was small groups. I was on call for the hospital, labor and delivery and emergency room every second to third night, every second to third weekend. And I was one of those people that if I had somebody with something going on in the hospital in labor or whatever, I just didn't sleep. So I went 20 years sleep deprived. And by the end of that, when I was in my late 40s, my body started just basically falling apart. And conventional colleagues really couldn't understand what was going on. Testing, borderline thyroid, borderline this, symptoms of MS, ended up with a cardiac cath because of all the heart symptoms. But nobody could really offer anything but drugs to cover it up. I kept thinking there's got to be a reason. I shifted to and became certified in holistic medicine, just looking at things. Stopped doing obstetrics. I just couldn't do the call. Started a primary care practice with this idea of I'm going to create a wellness practice. And that was
Mhm.
really before that was a thing. And changed my diet, changed my lifestyle, gradually clawed my way back to better sleep, but wasn't getting 100% better or anywhere close to it. Kept asking that question, could it be something like a microbe? And kept hearing about Lyme disease. Knew I'd had ticks all when I was during my childhood, but not an acute tick bite, especially. Um, so I finally got the test that said, yes, that's a possibility. Talked some colleagues into loading me up with antibiotics, and it just made me sicker instead of better. And knew that I was going to have to figure out other options and was looking out at the world of, all these crazy therapies, ozone and IV antibiotics for months on end, and talking to people that were not helped by that, and ended up finding an herbal protocol for Lyme disease. Went in with low expectations
Sure.
because I knew about herbal therapy. I had patients that were using it, and I didn't have any problem with it. I just didn't think it would do
Sure.
much, but it did. I was using high grade extracts, not stuff you would find in a basic health food store. I was ordering these specific extracts, high concentrations. And I assumed if it was actually going to make me well, it was going to also wreck my gut like the antibiotics.
Oh, sure.
It didn't. My gut got better and I got better. And it was definitely a start and stop kind of thing that it took me about 5 years to rid myself of all the symptoms, but that included horrible neurological symptoms, heart palpitations, skipping my heart, skipping beats, PVCs every second to third beat, chest pain chronically. And all of that went away and my joints got better. My joints were a wreck. At that time, by age 50, I assumed I would probably have joint replacements by the time I was 60. 67, my joints are great, you know,
I didn't think
and
I'd live to see
just
50, and at 56, I feel amazing. So
yeah.
the body is,
So
yeah.
it was just a big eye opener and left some huge question marks about how we treat chronic illness, but
Mhm.
also question marks about what is this thing we call Lyme disease. And my journey over the past 20 years has been understanding these microbes and realizing that if you really understand what's going on with someone with chronic Lyme, you have a pretty good understanding of anybody going on, what's going on with anybody suffering from any chronic illness. And looking at herbs as a really important solution for that is being ignored mostly.
Yeah. Well, you didn't learn about herbs in medical school, did you? Like a deep dive?
No, no, no,
Yeah.
no, no, nothing about nutrition, nothing about, environmental stresses other than you shouldn't smoke.
Right.
That's
Right.
about it.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and and I've come around to this conclusion. We are asking to do our conventional medical system to do something that it's not really designed to do. It
Yeah.
is exceptionally good for acute intervention.
Absolutely.
It's
That's,
great.
yep.
But management of chronic illness, we're not addressing the underlying causes, and we're not even paying attention to the potential that there are causes.
Right.
We're just acutely treating the symptoms every single day, and
Yes.
it just doesn't work. And it's put me in a very, very different place.
Share with us that direct connect between, okay, if you can understand what's going on with chronic Lyme, you understand chronic illness. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because I'm sure all listeners are leaning in, like, wait, what?
Well, let's
Yeah.
let's let's start with where I am now. That took me 20 years to get here, and it seems so ridiculously simple. And I've heard people say, "Oh, that's overly simplistic. It can't be that simple." It really is that simple. So, just a concept of what wellness is.
Yes.
So, you and I, are made up of cells, right?
Yes.
Our whole body is built of cells. We're about 90% cells, and the rest of it is connecting to connective tissue, holding that together, and minerals in our bones, and about 2 or 3 pounds of it is microbes that share the ride. But we're mostly cells, and everything that happens in our body is due to the actions of cells, whether that's your thyroid hormone being produced, your heart beating, it's all cellular,
All of it.
absolutely cellular.
Yeah.
And the mistake we make is we look at the body as a whole made up of parts, compartments. We have a liver, we have a heart, and we divide these compartments up and specialize in each compartment.
Hmm.
So, we have cardiologists and pulmonologists and all these different people who specialize in diseases in that particular compartment. But it doesn't work that way. It really doesn't.
We're whole integrated humans? What?
Well, Our body is made up of individual cells. And, if you want to simplify something, take it down to its smallest functional unit, and that's a living cell. All of our cells came from one cell. Every one of our cells diversified from that original cell that became us. So all of our cells are structurally similar. They all basically have the same parts. Now, those parts have been modified to do different jobs, but every one of our cells is an independently functioning unit, a little mechanical machine that does work, a biological machine. So they're all that way. Now, they're integrated by hormones and nerves and messaging. All the cells have to talk to one another for the body to be coordinated, but they're still independent functioning units. So a heart isn't a unit. It's a something that's made up of billions of cells, and every one of those cells are working in synergy, but they're all independent. So if you break it down to that smallest functional unit, you ask, what are the stress factors or what are the things that influence the function of those little machines? I mean, everything has operating requirements, right? So you get down to five things. And it's that simple. And that's the formula for wellness. So the first is cells need nutrients
Ah,
to produce energy, to replace parts, to do their job. It's like thyroid hormone or thyroid cells need iodine.
mhm.
Heart cells burn mostly fat for that slow, continual burn. So cells need nutrients, and if you're eating a modern processed food diet, you're not getting the selective nutrients that your cells need. So if you're eating a diverse whole food diet, which is a whole cell diet, you're getting everything that all of your cells need when they need it all at once. So the right nutrients, and if they don't get that, nutritional stress.
Sure.
Second to that is toxic stress
Hmm.
in your environment. All the chemicals and everything that we're exposed to are mostly petroleum or fossil fuel derived. And
Yep.
these are organic chemicals that used to be plant matter, but they were changed by all that pressure in the earth to be chemical distortions that aren't compatible with biological life. So we absorb these things really quickly, but they basically clog our cells up and act like our hormones and disrupt our system. So toxic stress, that's a huge one that's affecting everybody a lot more than people appreciate. And then you can have natural toxic substances like mycotoxins and things.
Sure.
Third thing is cells need downtime. So you work
Mm.
all day.
What?
Yeah, you stress your parts, you get wear and tear. So our cells, using a process of autophagy, are continually replacing worn out parts, but they need downtime. Now, some cells, like our heart cells, they need to rest in between beats, and that's one reason our heart cells are so vulnerable. But most of our cells need a good 8 hours every night of downtime to restructure and recover from the day before. So if you're sleeping an average of 6.5 hours, which is true for most people,
Yeah,
you're
not enough.
starting your next day with a deficit from the day before. So that's number three, downtime. Number four, this is where exercise comes in. I call it physical stress, which can be trauma, which has obvious concerns to your cells. But the other side of physical stress is we don't move enough. And what movement does, the biggest thing that exercise does for us is it increases blood flow. And that flushes away congestion and buildup of toxic substances that in those little fine spaces between cells. We really need that to clear that out so cells can breathe. So if we're not moving regularly, our cells get congested. We become stagnant. And so that's number four. And the fifth one is microbes. And that's where we can get
Ah,
into an interesting topic. So we don't think about it this way, but the harm that microbes do to us is they need our cells to reproduce. They need them for food and nutrients, that they also commandeer the parts of our cells. So how microbes do harm is by destroying our cells. So that kind of opens us up into thinking about chronic Lyme disease, but that's a formula for wellness. It's basically as simple as that.
which is I love, and I wasn't sure what all five were going to be. um, and so it's back to nothing in isolation, right? So you can't just manage microbes and be living on an ultra processed food diet and not
Right.
sleeping, not doing the other things, the moving, the detox. And so I love that you include those key tenets to wellness.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about the role, or like, are all microbes bad? Do we all have, you know what I mean? Because I think there's this tendency to, even when people are looking for answers, which is so understandable, I've been there, of, you're looking for that thing. And just because that thing is present doesn't necessarily mean that's driving, you know, fully your chronic illness. So let's educate us a little bit on
Sure.
microbes.
We tend to think of them as good or bad, but
Mhm.
they're not. They're just trying to survive.
Yeah.
And microbes are a threat to us because the ones that, the ones that are a threat to us are a threat because they need us, our cells, to survive. It's like there are lots of bacteria. I mean, there are viruses all over the surfaces of where you and I are sitting. There are bacteria on the floor. They're not a threat to us because they haven't adapted to invade a host. They don't need a host. They all need organic matter. Everything living is food for something else.
Sure.
So all microbes are living on organic matter that came from some living thing. Now, soil bacteria, it's dead organic matter. But all microbes need organic matter to survive. Every living thing does. So, what we're talking about here are host dependent microbes. They
Yes.
need a host to get the nutrients and things that they need to survive. And they can get that in different ways. So we have microbes that live in our body, right?
Mhm.
That we know we're full of microbes in our gut, and then we have microbes on our skin. But I consider these as isolated. They're outside of our tissues. So
Mhm.
we want to protect our cells. So we allow these microbes. We just kind of have to have them.
Mhm.
Um, but they're isolated from our tissues. So the gut, we have the gut lining that keeps the food and everything contained. We have our skin, which keeps moisture in and microbes out. So that's our first level of defense is barriers. And,
Barrier.
our
Yeah.
sinuses, the lining of our sinuses, the lining of our gums, those are all barriers to keep microbes out. So the things that live on the surface are picking up food that we don't use. I call it free food. So the things in our gut are living off the food that we don't use. Microbes on our skin are living off of oils on our skin. So a lot lower concentration because there's not much food. So there's free food. Now, what there's free food and protected food. Now what I call our tissues is protected food. So we don't really want microbes in our tissues. So we constantly are exposed to things that are trying to get in from the outside. And they have a lot of interesting ways of doing that. And we tend to label a microbe by the way it enters, wants to enter into the body. So we have respiratory infections, sexually transmitted infections, tick-borne or insect-related. So what they're all trying to do, though, is get across that barrier and get into our bloodstream. So all microbes, all invasive microbes are trying to get to the bloodstream because the bloodstream is the highway to all the tissues in the body. So even a respiratory infections, we have symptoms when that microbe is trying to break through those barriers, but that's not its primary goal. Its primary goal is to get to the bloodstream. And that's why pretty quickly when we're having a respiratory infection, we also start having systemic symptoms,
Mm.
some of which is the immune system's reaction, but
Sure.
also some microbes that have gotten through and gotten to the bloodstream. So when you
Crafty.
look at ticks and that sort of thing, oh boy, do they have a good deal because the tick just injects them right into the bloodstream where they
Yep.
want to go. And so our second level of defense is our immune system. That's the backup plan. And how good the immune system is in taking care of a microbe threat really depends on our past history,
Yeah.
our ancient history. So the immune system was built over millions and millions of years of give and take between different kinds of microbes. So the more exposure our ancestors had to something, the more familiar our immune system, the more built-in immunity we have.
Mhm.
Ebola virus is bad because humans have never been exposed to it.
Right.
So it's very, very threatening. AIDS jumped over from a primate in the 1980s. Even our things that we consider some of our ancient diseases like smallpox and the plague and things like that are a couple of thousand years old, but they have been able to trace them back to a relative to in all of human history. It was pretty recent. So when you look at tick-borne microbes, Borrelia, the Lyme bacteria, It's millions of years old, and ticks have been biting humans since the beginning of humans. So, for a lot of things, we have built in immunity. We have built in immunity to Borrelia, the Lyme bacteria, other co-infections like Bartonella and Babesia. And a lot of times, most of the time, when we get an infection with these microbes, they don't cause us to be acutely ill. And this is also true, you're probably well aware of this, is the association between mycoplasmas and rheumatoid arthritis, chlamydia, and multiple sclerosis. So the list of these things just goes on and on and on. And we're exposed to them a lot from the time we are born on. When we start putting things in our mouths, we pick up Epstein-Barr, we pick up viruses, we pick up mycoplasmas, we pick up all of these things. And I think we all have the idea that, sometimes we get an infection, we feel it, the symptoms go away, and the immune system has eliminated that microbe. And what
Or,
my journey has taught me is, yeah, that's not true.
yeah.
It's not the case. That these things have sophisticated ways of bypassing the immune system. So they enter the body, they're getting through the bloodstream as quickly as they can and invading cells. And once they invade cells, they're protected from the immune system. So that is a big goal. So not only are cells a resource for reproduction, they're protection. So this concept of microbes invading cells, and this is true of viruses and protozoa and bacteria and all lots of things that we're exposed to. But our third level of defense is our immune cells, our cells are not defenseless. So this was really interesting. That process of autophagy that cells use to rebuild themselves, they also can use it to destroy microbes. So our cells can actually have defense mechanisms. But with this give and take of millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years, microbes in the immune system have this kind of give and take tug of war. So a defense mechanism that many of these low-grade, what we call stealth pathogens use, is they slow their growth and they can even go dormant. So this concept of intracellular dormancy has fascinated me in that it appears that we collect things through our whole life, and some things may be worse than others, but these things collect in our tissues, and so we can be perfectly healthy and be harboring a wide range of pathogens in our tissues. So that's kind of where I am now with the whole thing.
Which I love. It is, I do think it is so important for people to understand because, again, back to that, there's this tendency when you're searching for answers and then you get, a test you haven't had before, or it's a better one, or it's just a different time and something's showing that's been hiding or dormant. And we think, oh, this particular thing, that's the answer I've been looking for. Like all my problems are this bug, right? And so I love that in your evolution is like, okay, and it makes so much sense when we think of, I have like, if Lyme has been around, because that's a different topic we won't even get onto, like the, but you said Borrelia is old, it's not new. Why does it seem like Lyme is rampant? I know a lot of chronic illness, also those first four categories are creating a big impact on wellness, right? With the food system and the toxins and the lack of sleep and all the things. But it just seems like, well, the problems aren't new. Why is chronic illness so much more rampant now
Yeah.
than?
I think there are multiple things that contribute to this. Part of it is awareness and perception.
Yeah,
So I'm fourth generation physician. My grandfather was a country doctor. I used to go on house calls with him. He had his black bag and he had antibiotics and various kinds of injections to help with symptoms. But wherever we went, he would call on people that were sickly and they didn't have a diagnosis.
right.
Because we didn't really start diagnosing things until after the 70s. We were just, we had all these new tools, vaccines, antibiotics, new kinds of drugs to relieve symptoms during that time. This was back in the 60s. But it only went so far. And that for people that were chronically ill, he'd give them a B12 shot. And that perception, and it probably did make them feel a little bit
Sure.
better because people with chronic illness are typically low in B12. But none of those people had a diagnosis.
Right.
And so we are so diagnosis oriented in our day and time. And personally, I find a lot of flaws with the concept of diagnosis in chronic illness. And I don't really use it very much because I think it can be very misleading. But so I think
I think
that's
it can
part of it.
hinder healing too. I really do. When people, it's human tendency then to identify with that diagnosis, and then
Yeah.
you're stuck in this place. So I want to shift. I think that that's a really amazing understanding. That's probably a new perspective for a lot of listeners on this process and these
Yeah.
microbes and the role that they're playing. I want to talk about herbs though, because I think so many of us, and even just listening to your journey, right? Like okay, you identified Lyme was at least part of the problem with your own struggles, but yet the antibiotics, which were supposed to be the cure, made you feel worse.
Right.
And we tend to, at least I have, I'll own it, think of herbs as this almost like a step down from prescriptions or medications. I want to
Yeah.
talk about that kind of misconception of, you know, the herbs versus, people think like, oh, well, if it really worked, it would be a prescription.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I wanted to finish up where we
Yeah,
left off
sorry.
just very quickly. I didn't want to leave people with the impression that it was just awareness that we, we weren't actually seeing more chronic illness. My
Right.
perception is we are seeing a lot more
Yeah.
chronic illness because we are not, we are ignoring cellular health. We're eating horrible diets, worse than ever before than
Yeah.
humans. We are exposed to higher concentrations of toxic substances than we ever have been. We're all running from the tiger with stress 24/7,
Yeah.
and we're not sleeping, we're not exercising. And the
We're doing it
microbe
all
thing,
wrong.
that's always there, but there's always that thing of we're more mobile than we have ever been too, and we probably are exposed to more microbes. So, yeah, I
Sure.
think we are seeing more chronic illness. And I think the way that we're using drug therapies is a really, really poor solution.
Yeah.
So the purpose of a diagnosis is to define the medical therapy. And the
Mhm.
medical therapy is designed to block or in some way inhibit the underlying manifestations of the illness so we don't feel it. We don't feel the symptoms. But it's not doing anything to
Not
reverse
the
cellular
cause.
stress, which is the
Yeah.
root cause. In fact, often it's adding to it. So people typically get
Yeah.
worse and they get more drugs, then they get more drugs, then they just get worse and worse. So what we're doing with a drug is blocking the manifestation of the chronic illness. That's all. We're
Yeah.
not doing anything for the root causes. And when you look at antibiotics, antibiotics are a really poor choice for this because antibiotics are really good for fast growing acute infections.
Mm.
Like a pneumococcal pneumonia, those bacteria are turning over every 20 minutes. Somebody can get sick really fast. They need an antibiotic. But antibiotics have a problem of within 10 days, they start disrupting your gut flora in a really bad way. And we talk about those good and bad, our friendly microbes in the gut. They're not friendly. What they want is to keep the food for themselves.
Yep.
So they secrete substances that suppress their competition, which happen to be pathogens, and we let them do that because it works for us.
Right.
So when you kill them off, the pathogens start to flourish. And also within 10 days, you start generating antibiotic resistant pathogens.
Mm.
And the third thing is it's toxic to cells and mitochondria. So
Right.
you're, 10 days, great. If you can't solve it in 10 days, you got a problem because you're going to really generate some real other problems. Antibiotic resistant pathogens now kill 1 million people every single year. And we haven't made any new antibiotics since the 80s when I was in medical school.
Wow.
So for these kinds of things, the chronic things that I'm talking about, antibiotics are not a good choice.
Yeah.
So looking at herbs, everybody thinks it's just a weak version of the drug, right? In some cases, that's true because some plants have drug-like properties, and many of our drugs actually come from plants.
Mhm.
But those aren't the herbs that most herbalists use, and I don't use. So what I'm using is herbs that have a low potential to have drug-like side effects, are well tolerated, can be taken for long durations. So what we're getting from an herb is we're basically borrowing the plant's defense system.
Mm.
So plants are multicellular organisms and
Yep.
they deal with the same stress factors that we do. So plants, instead of having a cellular immune system like we do, they have a chemical immune system. And that chemical immune system is very sophisticated. So it is selective for pathogens, but doesn't kill normal flora. It has a wide range of coverage of bacteria, protozoa, yeast, viruses, and it's it has this intelligence about it that is really interesting. So when we take every herb has antimicrobial properties, every single one. Some more than others, though, and it really depends on the microbe stress in that plant's native environment.
Makes sense.
So, like a warm, moist place like the Amazon, lots of microbe stress, really good antimicrobials. An herb like rhodiola, an adaptogen that's a native to Siberia, not a
Mhm.
lot of microbe stress there, but it's really good for helping us adapt to physical stresses. So sometimes the native environment and the stresses that the plant is having to tolerate will give you some clues of what that herb, that plant might be useful for. So a lot of herbs have really good antimicrobial properties, but because the risk of side effects of taking them is so low and they don't cause antibiotic resistant pathogens, they don't disrupt normal flora, they're not toxic to our cells, you can take them for a long time. For me, 5 years straight, high doses, and I've now been taking herbs continually for 20 years. And I've
Amazing.
experienced some of the best health in my life over the past 10
Woohoo.
years.
Yeah, amazing. Changing the story, right, of expected decline and this is kind of one directional living that people are experiencing.
Yeah,
Is there anybody who shouldn't take herbs, like just right off is it a contraindicated for,
very few, very
okay.
few. I mean, with the herbs that I'm using now, there's a pretty wide spectrum of what we define as an herb, all the way from
Hmm.
food plants and culinary herbs, which do have medicinal properties,
Hmm.
all the way to those herbs that I talked about that can have some drug-like properties. And I tend to stay away from that end of the spectrum. So I'm using a lot of adaptogens, or what I call antimicrobial adaptogens, herbs that mainly have the effect of protecting our health, and they do that by protecting our cells. So not only do they protect our cells from microbes, but also from free radicals,
Yeah.
toxic substances, all those stress factors that I talked about. The herb has a built-in system for doing that. So when we take an herb, we're taking in those defenses. So also plants use chemicals that are similar to our hormones and chemical messengers for regulating cellular functions. So herbs like adaptogens actually have chemicals that help balance our stress hormones or help our communication system work more smoothly. So we're getting all these robust qualities from the plant that are basically cell protectants. So that's the difference. Drugs are artificially blocking manifestations of illness and doing nothing to protect cells. Herbs are protecting cells. And that's really important because if you want to heal from a chronic illness, that's what you have to do. So, one of the more fascinating things about our cells is they have the ability to recover from stress. And that is the cornerstone of the healing process, is the ability of cells to recover and regenerate. So, drugs do nothing to help with that process. Herbs, by definition, by protecting cells, actually promotes the healing and recovery process. It takes time. It took me years to get rid of all the symptoms where, a drug will block it in an hour.
Right.
But the difference is the herbs are actually promoting healing and promoting wellness at the cellular level. There is no drug that has that capability.
Which is so important to understand. And I was thinking about, I was glad you used the word intelligence. I think like anybody who's ever gardened, I'm like totally simplifying the conversation, but we garden all the time, and it is the season here in Colorado right now. And
Yeah.
it always is astounding to me how, and I have I've raised, not raised, all kinds of different garden beds, but even in the raised beds, the weeds are always right in with the roots of the good thing I planted.
Yeah.
It's almost like there is this innate intelligence of protection of,
Yeah.
if I pull out a weed and I'm not being really careful, I'm going to pull out what I planted. Like it's just fascinating. There's just so much we haven't considered about this plant intelligence. Not to get like too woo woo, but just even seeing that on a simple level is like, okay, I know. And when you think of, like you mentioned, so many of our prescription medications or even over-the-counter medications are made from an extract of a plant, but they're not taking that complex compounds that plants have. Humans are really good at like, oh, this one thing must be good. We'll use that.
Well, there is a little bit of a story around behind that. All of our antibiotics come from natural sources, either a bacteria, a fungus, or a plant. And it's because we're not smart enough. I used to think antibiotics, it was some scientist, brilliant scientist who was dreaming up chemicals in a lab to fight bacteria. It's like we're not that smart. We pull from nature.
Yeah,
Ivermectin that you've heard so much about lately came from a bacteria in a swampy area in a golf course in Japan. You know,
right,
and so they get an organism and pull something out of it, pull chemicals, and then kind of randomly see what might work, where throw it against the wall and see what
right.
sticks. And
Yeah,
then they take that one chemical and potentiate it so that they can get a patent on it because you can't patent anything natural. But we
right,
don't duplicate the organism's defense system. It's one random chemical.
right.
But we do that with a lot of our drugs. Half our drugs came from plants. And I used to think, well, they're getting these drugs from the herbs that we've been using. No, they're not. And, I was reading stories about them going into the Amazon to look for new plants in the rainforest and thinking, why are you looking for new stuff? We've got all these herbs there. That's not what they want. They want poisonous plants.
Mm.
So all of our drugs come from plants that have poisons in them, and we pull out that poison and use it at a therapeutic dose to inhibit or block a reaction in the body. And everybody knows, you take more than the recommended dose of any drug, even something over the counter like ibuprofen, you can get in real trouble with that.
Sure.
So yeah, it's very, very
Then
different
maybe
from
we got it
plants.
wrong.
Yeah. Well,
Well, it's,
I would say that there is a place and purpose for every drug
of
made, and I think
course.
that's extremely important. I'm not anti-drug. It's just we are using them irrationally and
Yeah.
indiscriminately, and we're ignoring one of the most important forces of healing on the planet, and often discounting it. And I think that needs to change.
Uh, How do people find, other than, your book, which people should definitely, just start their journey, get the book and get some understanding of it is, in a way, it's a new old perspective, right? Like herbal, we know herbal medicine is not new,
Right.
but I feel like, there's all of this effective old wisdom that kind of got tossed
Yeah.
aside in modern times, thinking we could do it better. That the more we can get back to the more true wellness, even at the cellular level, we can achieve and maintain. But how does somebody know, you know, who to trust when it comes to herbs?
Sure. Yeah, that's not always an easy question to
I
answer, and
know.
that's one of the reasons I wrote the book is to help people navigate that space and, start out with what I call green zone herbs, the things that you really can't get in trouble with. So a good place to start for a lot of people is things that are well known, like turmeric. That one is, that it's a wonderful anti-inflammatory. The adaptogens that you're hearing about,
Yeah.
and that includes both herbs and medicinal mushrooms.
Hmm.
Um, Turmeric is a really nice herb for people to start out with. We do a product that has boswellia, another herb that just has wonderful anti-inflammatory properties. The two work synergistically. Adaptogens like ashwagandha, people are hearing about. It's really nice for stress. Um, Getting a good grade extract is really important. Some of the medicinal mushroom adaptogens like reishi, cordyceps, lion's mane, there are lots of them. Reishi has been evaluated by the Japanese and has been found to have some of the most potent anti-cancer substances on Earth. And all herbs. I haven't researched an herb yet that doesn't have anti-cancer properties, and that's because it's protecting our cells. That's
Makes
where cancer
sense.
comes from.
Yeah.
So, yeah, all of these things are really important for us to do. For recovering from chronic illness, there are many, many herbs that have been, we know a lot about them, quite frankly, because of Lyme disease.
Hmm.
And Johns Hopkins took a notice of this a couple of years ago. A researcher was looking at herbs that might kill Borrelia, and they found that certain herbs that had been used in chronic Lyme disease, uh, including Japanese knotweed, Chinese skullclap, Cryptolepis, several others, actually worked as well as doxycycline for killing the bacteria,
Yeah.
which is
Without the
fascinating.
downside.
Without the downsides, without
Yeah.
disrupting the gut flora, without generating antibiotic resistant pathogens. And, it's definitely something to take notice on. Here you've got this thing that's not expensive, has a low potential to harm you, and wow, it really can do wonderful things. I think the big deal though is people don't get good quality products.
Yes.
And a lot of people are getting whole herb powders, which they basically take, if you get a bottle and it's cost, $10 or $15 and it's got capsules in it, and you take the capsules out and it's got powder. Basically, what they've done is they've taken the plant, dried it, and crushed it up into a powder. And
Hmm.
you're getting a lot of fiber and not much of the chemistry of the actual plant. Next to that is tinctures. Tinctures are very good. And most of your tinctures are worth taking. A lot of times you have to take a lot because they're not very concentrated. There's a pretty bitter taste. What I utilize most in my practice in my life, and and uh, and the company that I have is standardized extracts. So a standardized extract looks just like a whole herb powder. It's a capsule with powder in it. But it's different in that what they've done is they've taken a tincture, which is pulling the chemicals out of the plant. They dry off the water and alcohol and put that into a capsule, the powder that's left over. So it's often 10 times or more concentrated than a whole herb powder. And the way to know that is if you look on a bottle and it just gives the name of the herb, or even worse, a proprietary blend of a bunch of herbs, but
Oh,
that's
man.
all you get,
Hmm.
it's probably not a very good quality product. So a good quality product is going to list each herb in the product. It's going to give the scientific name. It's going to say it's standardized to X phytochemical, and it's going to give the milligram quantity of that specific herb. There you're talking about something that might make a difference. And then if you can look for the quality standards of the company, our company, we do a lot of testing to make sure
And
that
this
there are
is
no
Vital
contaminants,
Plan,
to make
the
sure that it
company.
is exactly what it's supposed to be. And, it's about 50-50. Half of companies out there are doing that same level. Half of them aren't. And
Yeah.
you really just have to pay attention more. It's really easy to get caught up in the marketing hype,
Sure.
and start asking questions, looking for ingredients. That's
Yeah.
really important.
Well, and I love it's the same whether it's food or any other product is turn it around, read the, don't fall for
Yep.
the marketing or how pretty the label is or what it says it is. Turn it around and really see what's in it. I always love, when people start companies because they want to get the quality product to help others. Those are the companies that are stay trustworthy and I think that's always I get excited when it's like, well, I couldn't find this thing, so I started a company to right like to bring what you needed and what we need out to market.
Yeah, this was for me, that was 15 years ago. And I was in this little office that I'd built into a wellness practice, and people were really liking it. And I was getting my health back. And I wanted them to have the same quality of herbs. And I was having a really hard time finding products that met my specifications. So I was able to do something that is impossible to do now. I wrote and got involved in correspondence with a large supplement manufacturer, and they agreed to build products to my specifications. And so I learned the supply chain. I
Yeah.
researched where I could get specific grade extracts and where I could get the highest quality. And I was having that shipped to the company, and they were doing small runs, like a couple hundred bottles for me, just for
Wow.
my patients in my office. Nobody will do that anymore. You have to
Yeah.
have thousands of bottles. But gradually, my daughter and I built that into a company to serve people with all of these kinds of needs. And it's been an interesting journey.
It's amazing, and what a resource for people. And I just want to highlight even when you were talking about your own healing, took 5 years of we're all, and of course we all want relief and we all want to feel better as quick as possible. But I always tell people, when we're addressing chronic illness, it didn't happen overnight. So always be wary of anybody that promises you,
Yeah,
this quick hit, whether it's a 10-day course of antibiotic, whatever it is, that it's going to take. But the beauty is, like, the cells that are making up this my body right now are not the same cells that made up my body 20 years ago when I was sick. So
right.
if we understand that, and understand, I love your, self-care is cell care, we'll really get down to, okay, I think most of us with chronic illness can understand cellular health and mitochondrial health, and because we know what it feels like to not feel
Right.
well. And so it makes sense that, well, that's the level at which we need to address healing.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, it's your body is made of cells, and if you are chronically ill, every aspect of that chronic illness can be rooted in cellular stress. Inflammation is cellular stress. Hormone and dysfunction is cellular stress. Every symptom, all your abnormal labs are cellular stress. So when you start focusing on getting one cell healthy
Yeah.
by doing the things that you need, that's the key to actually getting well. That's what's going to help you more than any other single thing. And the micro factor, that's a big factor. I think what I'm finding is connections to virtually every chronic illness to these low-grade stealth microbes, rheumatoid arthritis, everything, autoimmune,
Yeah.
chronic multiple sclerosis, absolutely everything. And so herbs ought to be a really central part of the recovery process, because you can suppress those microbes without disrupting your gut flora, without generating antibiotic resistant pathogens. So you can do it for a long time, as long as it takes.
Yeah, which is amazing. What a gift. You
Truly.
won't, I look at it as, again, as like, what's the downside to, and I actually think there's relief for people in that approach of one cell, just every change you make to support one cell is going to move the needle. Like, we heal one step at a time, and not that there is this there isn't a magic bullet. And
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking not only your training and your personal experience and your wisdom, but then, to have the book and create a guide for people and a company where they can access the quality of the herbs that they need, is really, really amazing work.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I
Yeah,
wouldn't trade it for
probably not
anything.
what you planned on, right? When you first went to
No,
medical
not at
school.
all. But I wouldn't trade it.
Yeah,
I
of
just wouldn't
course.
trade it.
Well, we're at that point in the conversation where I ask you a trick question, which is, what is one step listeners can take starting today to improve their health?
You start learning about herbal therapy, because I imagine a lot of your listeners are already trying to change their diet and get better sleep
Yep.
and, get moving again and all of those things. But it's the micro factor that I think people are missing. And the herbs are the one thing that can help that the very, very most. But at the end of that, what you're doing is creating an environment inside your body that promotes cellular recovery. And that is the key to wellness.
Ah, amazing. There you have it. Cellular recovery, and doable. And I love that you're like, it doesn't need to be these crazy out of the box therapeutics, or strange things that you have to leave the country to go get addressed. As these are things we can be doing in our own homes to support our
Yeah.
cellular health.
Sometimes those things are indicated, but what I find
Sure.
is if people focus on the basics first and do those things very intently,
Yeah.
most people don't need those other things.
Yeah. Absolutely. Or, if you're going to just do it in synergy, and that's
Yeah,
great too, if you
yeah,
can.
for sure.
So amazing. For people that are listening on the go and aren't going to check the notes, where's the best place to find more about you and to find the book?
Our company is vitalplan.com, but I also have just an information page or website, rawlsmd.com, and put /resources. That will get you a lot of great information.
Nice.
Those are the best places to find me.
Amazing. I so appreciate your time, your wisdom,
Pleasure.
and just the education that you're bringing to everybody.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
For everyone listening, remember you can get those show notes and transcripts by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.